Welcome into the Bubba Rose Show. Really appreciate you tuning in wherever you've joined us, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or one of our many audio-only podcast platforms. Right now, very excited to be joined by a guy who spent 3.5 decades or so refereeing Division I football and just college football in general, and also shares a passion that I have with East Carolina athletics, specifically East Carolina baseball. Welcome into the show, Dr. Jerry McGee. And Dr. McGee, how are you?
I'm doing quite well, thanks.
Absolutely. We appreciate you coming on the show. So we'll start. I'll talk about East Carolina baseball. The Pirates are hosting a regional for the third consecutive time. Obviously, 2020 notwithstanding with the COVID-19 shortened campaign. But just talk about the pride that you take in East Carolina baseball and seeing everything that Cliff Godwin and company are doing with that program.
Well, I couldn't be more excited. And I was thinking this morning that us having this conversation today, I said, gosh, what an exciting time to do it right on the heels of the announcement about hosting the regionals. But I just think we've got a terrific coach. We've got a nice facility now. We seem to be attracting some really talented players, and they're kind of like the teams were when I was there. We're a bunch of gym rats, and they love one another and they love the game. And I'm real excited about where the program is.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Cliff Godwin has done a tremendous job. Hard to believe that he's in year 7 now, and obviously such a proud tradition going back to your time as a Pirate when we were vying and winning NAIA national titles. So just what are your memories of wearing the purple and gold?
Well, it's one of the greatest honors of my life. I always loved baseball. I grew up in a baseball era where every community had a boys team or a girls team, and also a men's team. All the textile mills where my parents worked, they all had teams. Most small towns in North Carolina had a minor league affiliation of some kind. There was Negro League baseball going on. We were able to watch Sunday afternoon. It was just, and to get to wear that East Carolina uniform and think back on those times. They won the national championship NAIA in my high school senior year, so we all wanted to go there and play. And when we got there, our sophomore year, it was a rebuilding year. We had 2 sophomore catchers, 2 sophomore first basemen, a freshman second baseman, a sophomore shortstop, and a freshman center fielder. And almost all the pitchers were freshmen and sophomore. So not much was expected of that team, but we had 3 outstanding seniors, Merle Bynum, Lacey West, and Junior Green, who gave us great leadership. We had a baseball coach and knew more about baseball than anybody I'd ever known, Earl Smith. We had a favorable schedule, and we enjoyed one another and enjoyed the game. And I didn't get to play as much as I wanted to, but probably nobody else did either. But we put it all together, and the team wound up going back to the NAIA World Series. And it was pretty exciting. In fact, I think it was the last time an East Carolina team has been to a baseball World Series, 1963. But it was a very happy time in my life, and stayed in touch with many of those athletes over the years. And we had 3 Hall of Famers on that team. We had Lacey West and Carlton Barnes and Jimmy Rayner, and it was such an honor to be on the same team they were on.
Yeah, with everything we've gone through as a society over the last 15 months, it's kind of fitting that this will be the first East Carolina home game of the season where Clark LeClaire Stadium can be at full capacity. And, thinking back to, I guess it was March of 2020, the last time we've had a full capacity crowd, at an East Carolina sporting event, period, be it baseball, men's basketball, etc. So it should be quite the atmosphere at Clark LeClaire this weekend.
Oh, it's going to be great. And I was laughing last night. I told my wife, I said, boy, I'd hate to be the starting pitcher against East Carolina in this series, because that place is going to be rocking. It's going to be loud, and there'll be a lot of excitement, a lot of expectation. And so I think it's going to be the atmosphere is going to give us a great opportunity to be successful.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Tremendous home field advantage there with Clark LeClaire Stadium in the jungle. Kind of transitioning, we talk about your background in baseball. Talk about how you got into officiating football, because a lot of times I know Ramey Steins, who played baseball for the Pirates, he has been a long time in Division I basketball official and doing a lot of great things in the officiating side of things in the ACC and other major conferences. So just talk about how you got into football when you were a baseball player.
It was really funny. When you're in college, you don't ever have enough money. So I was always looking for some way to make a few bucks. And I got to know Coach Jack Boone, who was the retired football coach, and he was head of the men's intramural program. And he suggested I come out and officiate some intramural football games. And I've always laughingly said, if you can officiate a Pica Sigma Nu, you can officiate Army Navy. It's kind of the same atmosphere. But when I started officiating there, I went back to my hometown, and I got involved in officiating all three sports back then, because my wife was trying to finish her degree, and I was looking for enough money to pay her tuition. So I did high school football, I did high school and college baseball, and did a little bit of high school basketball. I love the baseball part of it. I got to officiate some games down at UNC Pembroke and St. Andrews, and plus my high school schedule. But most of the games were played in the daytime, and it was really, really hard for me to get off work in the daytime. And so football was played at night, and so that's kind of why I wound up there. And it usually was towards the weekend. It was Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday. So, but I always said that baseball players make great officials, football officials, because we can run and we can catch the ball, and that's a very important part of the job. And but it was kind of a natural evolution just to get involved in sports officiating, and much simpler back then. No social media to deal with, and no cell phones to deal with. It was just a bunch of folks who loved the game and enjoyed being a part of it.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense why you opted for football as opposed to baseball, because that was going to be one of my questions for you. And obviously with your sons, Ryan and also Sam, which we'll talk a little bit more later on when we touch on the book, the tremendous book, Sidelines and Bloodlines, that came out within the last year during the COVID times. And I've had the opportunity to start reading it. I really look forward to finishing it. But, just talk about, with officiating major college football. I know when you started off, you were doing small college football, and you kind of referenced that already, but you were doing games like Guilford College and ones like that, correct? And how quickly did you work your way up the ranks? And when was your first, major college game? Whether it was 1AA or obviously 1A as it was at the time.
Yeah, it was really funny. Those early days, I bumped into a lot of East Carolina guys. Jerry Tolley and Mickey Brown were coaching at Elon, and Charlie Forbes was coaching at Guilford, and Henry Van Sant was coaching at Guilford, and later Lenore Ryan. So I bumped into a lot of East Carolina people in small college football. But I guess my first game was Guilford and Emory and Henry. And I think there were 600 people at the game or something like that. But it took me several years to. I had my military obligation to take care of in the middle of all of it. But I guess my first college game at all in football was 73 or 4 or something like that. And in '81, I moved up to the ACC and started working games such as James Madison at Virginia and Citadel at Clemson and schools like that, and you work your way up into the conference games, and then pretty soon you're doing a national schedule. And I left the ACC for 7 years, doing a national schedule with the Big East because their teams tended to play up, and I wanted to go to the big venues and work the big games. And so that was, other than those 7 years, all my time was spent in the ACC. 400 college games, 300 Division I games. So it's I was out there a long time.
Now talk about you talk early '80s in the ACC. You referenced Clemson. Obviously, Danny Ford had a tremendous run there at Clemson in the 1980s. So just talk about what Coach Ford and other coaches in that era. You mentioned the Big East. After that, maybe whether it was Jimmy Johnson or Butch Davis at Miami or whoever it was, Dennis Erickson. Talk about your interaction with some of those high-profile, well-known coaches.
Sure. Well, I really enjoyed working for Coach Ford. He was very intense. He would get in your face about a call pretty quickly, but he was a great guy. And he, when the play was over, you moved on. But I had a lot of fun with him on the sideline. The first time I was ever there, the week before I had been at Catawba. I think there was maybe 1,200 people at the game. I go to Clemson, there's 80,000. And I had as luck would have it, a very complicated play happened. And it was complicated to Coach Ford. It wasn't that complicated to us because we had a quarterback for the visiting team ran the ball about 40 yards downfield. And then at the last minute tried to pitch the ball, and he pitched it forward. And it wasn't caught. So what we have is an illegal, incomplete forward pass. So we throw the marker and signal incomplete pass. But Coach Ford had a different opinion. And because they fell on the ball, he said, we don't want a penalty, we want the ball. The coach, you just recovered an incomplete pass. You can't do that. What are y'all going to do? We're going to penalize him 5 yards from where he pitched the ball forward. They're going to keep the ball. We're going to move on. And I'll never forget, he pushed his hat back on his head and looked at me and he said, McGee, you never been to Clemson, have you, son? I said, no, sir, but no matter where that happens, that's an incomplete illegal forward pass. And he looked at me and he said, well, this ain't damn Catawba. And I said, you're exactly right about that, Coach, because then he had 80,000 people screaming my name. It was really kind of fun, but I worked a zillion of his games, and back in those days, you only had 8 teams in the ACC, so unless you got a Clemson game, you didn't have many really big games. And so when I left with the Big East for 7 years, when I came back, of course, expansion had started and things had changed a lot, but I loved it. My 7 years in the Big East were great because we had the 8 Big East schools. We had Notre Dame, we had Army, Navy, and Louisville. So we had, instead of 10 games a year, we had 14 games a year, which was really cool for us. You also got to work the Army Navy game. You got to go to Notre Dame. So it was a fun 7 years, but then I was able to come back and finish up with my buddies in the ACC.
Yeah, you talk about calling Notre Dame games. Obviously, a tremendous venue there in South Bend with Notre Dame Stadium, Touchdown Jesus. But I know Lou Holtz. There's actually a quote from him on your book. It says, "In my 40+ years of coaching, I never shared a sideline with a more respected official than Jerry McGee." So I know that had to mean a lot to you, coming from the likes of a Lou Holtz. But just talk about that relationship with Coach Holtz.
Sure, it was interesting because the first time I ever had a Notre Dame game was the national championship game in the Orange Bowl. It was Notre Dame in Colorado. And then the next time I had a Notre Dame game, it was Notre Dame in Colorado in the Fiesta Bowl. And then I had Michigan at Notre Dame. And then I had Notre Dame at Penn State. And then the next time I saw him, he was at South Carolina Clemson game. And when I came walking across the field, he looked at me and started laughing. He says, well, the biggest game of the day, biggest game of the week, I should have figured you would be here. but we just had a very respectful relationship. I respected what he had done, and professionally and personally, and he had gotten to know me over the years, and he knew that I was trying to run a university, and so we just kind of mutual respect. And but when I look back, when you're playing or coaching or officiating, the most important game in the world is the one you're doing. And when that game is over, you do the next game, and that's the way you approach your schedule. But when I went to Notre Dame one day for the Michigan at Notre Dame game, and I'm in the locker room talking to Lou Holtz, and I get the Notre Dame captains, and we're walking down the stairs. I look up, and there's that sign we've all seen so many times: "Play like a champion today." We walk down the end zone, and I've got Michigan on one side, I got Notre Dame on the other side, and I'm talking to Paul Hornung, and the great, one of the greatest Packers ever, one of the greatest Notre Dame players ever, Johnny Lujack, Heisman Trophy winner, standing there talking with me, and I'm thinking, this is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
And I think that's the first time I really started thinking about where I had gotten. And at the end, you start looking back, and you've officiated 14 Heisman Trophy winners, and you officiated 30 coaches in the College Football Hall of Fame. And you start realizing how blessed you were to be a part of the evolution of this game that we all love and care so much about. And it's but just to have had a moment to be friends with Vince Dooley and Danny Ford and John Robinson and Joe Paterno and Pat Dye and Barry Switzer and Johnny Majors. I mean, that's pretty special.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And you bring up Coach Dye. Unfortunately, we lost Coach during the pandemic. I had the opportunity to meet several East Carolina folks who played for Coach Dye, and really enjoyed hearing their stories when we were paying tribute to him. But when you were talking about Coach Holtz, you referenced that Notre Dame, Colorado Orange Bowl back in the day when I guess was that the split national championship year?
Yeah, that was 1990, I think.
Right, when Georgia Tech split it.
Yeah, and they were all Colorado had to do was win that game. They would have been certainly the national champion overall. But when Notre Dame upset them, that kind of threw a monkey wrench in everything. Then the next year, Colorado came back and beat Notre Dame and won the national championship. I think that was a split year.
But you bringing up that Notre Dame Colorado game struck a chord with me, reminding me, I guess I was 9 years old at the time, but I vividly remember seeing on television, that spotlight on the down marker that had where it never changed when Colorado got 5 downs to beat Missouri. What are your memories of that situation?
Well, it's hard to imagine how that could have happened, but it really was unfortunate, and I guess that was one of the reasons eventually we wound up seriously looking at instant replay. But what people don't realize, and of course I've been out a few years now, so it could have changed. But when I was officiating, I only had instant replay like 4 years. But once you went to the booth, if you had something on the field that happened and you went to the replay booth, they were going to dictate what happened after that. So even if you disagreed with them, they were going to say. And we've got a game, Citadel and Clemson, and we had a kind of a complicated play, and it wound up in the booth. And he came back and ruled such and such, and he said, so it'll be Citadel's ball, 3rd down. And the young referee, who's now in the Hall of Fame, now in the NFL, he looked at me and said, "What down do you have?" I said, "It's 4th down." He said, "Well, the replay guy said it's 3rd down." I said, "I'm telling you right now, it's 4th down." So we had a long discussion on the field. We all thought it was 4th down, so we kept going back to the booth. He kept saying it was 3rd down. We said, "Well, go back and look at the thing. Let's get this right." He said, "Guys, it's 3rd down." Well, it's 4th down, and so they got an extra play out of the deal, but it was but I think the score was 31-0, so it didn't matter too much. But you just once you let the decision leave the field and go to the booth, you're kind of subject to whatever they decide after that. And so I was always saying, let's get it on the field. Let's get on the field right now. Don't go to the booth unless we have to. But it's replay has not what we imagined it would be. It's taken on a life of its own, and I think I'm not sure it's really helping the game much.
You shared a couple of excellent stories already regarding Lou Holtz and also Danny Ford and that first experience down in Death Valley. But I know you had the opportunity you called a national championship game, actually your last game between Urban Meyer and his Florida Gators and Bob Stoops in Oklahoma. But you also, I'm sure, down through the years, did some games coached by Steve Spurrier, I would imagine. What are some stories, things that our viewers or listeners would enjoy hearing about your relationship, jokes or comments they may have made to you that are okay to share?
I'll never forget having a Vanderbilt at Duke one night when Coach Spurrier was at Duke. We called that the SAT Bowl. About half the guys out there were going to law school or medical school or dental school or something. But it was pouring. It was just freaking pouring rain in Durham. And neither team was very good. Duke, I think, was maybe a little more talented. But Vanderbilt was trying to get in position to try a field goal at the end of the first half. And they threw a pass on my side, and the guy dove and caught the ball. And he was falling out of bounds, and there was nobody anywhere near him. So I'm 2/3 of the way through with a timeout signal. And I realized the guy's knee hit about 3 inches in bounds. And I was pouring. I said, nobody saw that with me. So I go on. And as soon as the play is over, I heard this voice right behind me. He said, "What was that?" I looked around, and it was Coach Spurrier standing right behind me. And I said, "That was temporary insanity. Leave me alone." And we go ahead and finish. And fortunately, Vanderbilt missed the field goal. So at halftime, when I went to get the captains, Coach Spurrier said, "I need to see you a minute." And I said, "Sure." So he walks outside and he says, "That's the funniest thing an official's ever said to me. But you'd really be glad he missed that damn field goal. I'll tell you that." So I said, "Well, I am." And I think Duke wound up winning by 1 point. So I almost screwed that up. It was, but he was, when a guy like Pat Dye or Vince Dooley or Steve Spurrier, if those guys get on you about a call, you better look at the film because you might have screwed up, because they were so astute and they saw the field so well. And some coaches just yell and scream all the time, but when guys like that get after you, John Robinson, Southern Cal, when he gets after you, you better look at the film because there might be something messed up there.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. As far as not just always yelling and screaming, but yelling and screaming when cut and dried that you're in the right, and it carrying more weight. But you talked about how special it was to call a game at Notre Dame. I know you also worked at least one, if not multiple, Rose Bowls. What are some of those other tremendous venues that you'll really remember?
Yeah, I think I got to go to the Rose Bowl twice, and that's awfully special. I just we all grew up watching it as kids, and I think it's always nice to go work one of those games when it's not a national championship. Working national championships are a great honor, but I worked two Rose Bowls. The first one was a national championship game, and the second one wasn't. Well, the second one was a lot more fun because you could just relax and have a nice time and work the game. It's not quite as intense, but my two trips there, my trip to the Orange Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, they were all very special. I was able to go to 26 postseason games, and the Army Navy games. I was able to work two of those. Those were very special. One was on the 50th anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and so that was a really big deal for everybody. And but it was just being a part of those games and just reflecting. Now that I've been out a few years, reflecting, I think I realized just how blessed we were to be a part of it. when you're doing it, it's a job and you're working at it. But when it's all over and you can take a deep breath and you can say, gee, that was very special to be a part of it. But I always tried to tell myself that the most important game in America every week was the game I was officiating. If that was Liberty and Charleston Southern, or if it was Notre Dame and Michigan, the most important game of the week was my game. And I always tried to approach it that way because for those players and those coaches, it was the most important game in America. So that was always my attitude.
Now, earlier I referenced the Miami Hurricanes of the 80s and 90s. They were really the team of that era, winning so many national championships. They were known for their swagger, as was well documented in the ESPN 30 for 30 series. But did you ever call those Miami teams games and just talk about the chippiness and just the type of game and display, I guess you could say, that they brought to the table and what it was like to officiate their games, or maybe some other teams, kind of along those lines that come to mind?
Yeah, they were with Coach Johnson and Coach Erickson. They were really, really an interesting crowd to be around. But if you were down there on a Saturday night at the old Orange Bowl Stadium in Miami, when they were so good, that place was absolutely cracking. It was there was so much noise, and they came out to the smoke and the screaming, and 6 or 8 NFL stars standing on the sideline with them. It was really a tough place for other teams to come in and play. And I always felt like it was very special to have a game down there. And when they went to, I had them on the road a lot too. And I remember having them up at Maryland one year when they both were in the top 10. And what a great football game it was. 2 great coaches, Jimmy Johnson and Bobby Ross. And it came down to the last few seconds, but they were a very, what's the word I'm looking for? They were very confident, very cocky. They had every expectation of winning, and a lot of chatter, especially early in the game. Once the game, we always said the games like that, the first 2 series, there's a lot of chippiness, but once they just start playing, they kind of get over that. But then if it gets out of hand, if it gets to 31-3 or 45-7 in the fourth quarter, they can kind of get pretty difficult to officiate.
You've been out of things a little over a decade now. Hard to believe, but just talk about whether it was during your time in the game or since, just the way things have changed. Obviously, even since then, the speed of the game, the up-tempo offense is being employed by so many schools, and just the impact that's had, instant replay, rule changes. What are some of the big things that come to mind? Name 2 or 3 maybe that stand out.
Well, when I first started officiating college football, 120 to 130 plays was kind of what you would have an expectation of on a Saturday afternoon. They only threw the ball on 3rd and long. They kicked off in the 40-yard line. Nobody could kick it in the end zone. It was just the punts were 35 yards, and towards the end, you're having 180, 200 plays in a game, kicking 58, 57-yard field goals. Every kickoff was in the end zone, and every rule, practically in all my years of officiating, practically every rule that seemed to be changed was changed to help the offense. So instead of having a lot of 7-3 games and 14-7 games, we started having 51-47 games and 45-42 games, and of course that's what the fans seem to like. But the rules really changed the game, and the speed was just there's just no way to even describe it. When you got players that are on the 4x100 relay team in the Olympic Games playing wide receiver. I mean, you got to keep up with that guy. It just when we first started having side judges as a seventh official in college football. I worked the first game in America that had a side judge. I was the side judge. And it was Maryland and Penn State, both in the top 10. Maryland was preseason number 1. Penn State actually won the national championship. But I got run over about 4 times in the first half because I was 7 yards downfield. And I just called our supervisor the next day. I said, my God, we got to back up. I got killed out there tonight. So we backed up to 12 yards. Well, my last year officiating, we were 22 yards downfield. In my last game, we had 2 very, very quick teams. So my last game was the national championship in 2009, and I worked the entire game 28 yards downfield. Because if you don't get that far back with their speed, they'll be by you and gone so quickly. And it's just that part of the game. I think the speed and the difference in the kicking game were probably the thing that changed more than anything. When those great teams at Florida State and Miami emerged, suddenly they're throwing it 30 yards downfield on first down, which was completely changed the game. You're throwing, instead of throwing 12 passes a game, you're throwing 60 passes a game. And it just seemed like everything changed. And then we had the instant replay was supposed to help us, which I'm not sure it does. And then we wound up, here we are, 2021, and we still don't know what to do with targeting. I think when the targeting rules was first put in place, everybody applauded because as an official on the field, you can tell when somebody's targeting somebody. But now it's like anytime the running back drops his head, the defensive back drops his head, and next thing you know, you got helmet-to-helmet contact, and you kick the number 1 player on the defense side of the game, and it just changes everything. And they've got to figure out how to manage that rule, or I don't know. I mean, it's just right now it's chaotic. And my recommendation, which nobody listens to, but my recommendation is every targeting shouldn't be an ejection. I think you could have targeting with an ejection and targeting without an ejection. But it's every time it seems to me like it's gone from intentional targeting to unintentional headbutting having the same consequence. And I think they've got to get that fixed.
Couldn't agree more. I'm so glad you brought that up because that was going to be the last thing that I asked you before we very quickly touch on your book, because that's something I've grown so frustrated with, as a former player and having coached in recent years. Some of the officials that are the way they're applying the targeting rule, and I really can't stand the ejection. Should it be in play on certain hits? Absolutely, like you just said. But there are definitely times where there's no way some guys should be ejected because, how much these guys invest year round. And yes, you have to keep the safety front and center, but at the same time, if it's not intentional, it has to be blatantly obvious, in my opinion, for a guy to be ejected and miss a remainder of a game or part of a next game.
Yeah, it's just it's a little too punitive right now, and they really need to deal with it.
Lastly, certainly not least, let's talk about Sidelines and Bloodlines, father, his sons, and our life in college football. I mentioned earlier, Ryan, obviously everything he's done with ESPN, does such a tremendous job as a storyteller and writer. And then your son, Sam, who's also here in the Charlotte area, I believe is a lawyer. So just talk about y'all's love of college football and the experiences that you've had through the years with your sons as a result of what you did.
Sure. When I started officiating college football, my guys were really, really small. When I started into the Division I, they were big enough to understand and go to the games and that sort of thing. And I remember when I lived in the Raleigh area, we had Duke, Carolina, and State all having scrimmages on the same weekend. So sometimes I would work a Friday night scrimmage at NC State, a Saturday morning scrimmage at Duke, and a Saturday evening scrimmage at Carolina. And so when I'd get up the weekend would come, my wife would say, "Wait a minute, you gonna be officiating all weekend?" I said, "Yes, you take these two little knuckleheads with you. I don't want to drag them, follow me around all weekend." So off we go, and they play on the hill, and they'd give the assistant coach give them a football, and they go play with the coaches' kids and that kind of thing. But they was always around the game with me, and so they grew to love it, to love it as well. And my daughter-in-law says, actually, she says that Sidelines and Bloodlines is not a book about football; it's a love story about a father and his two sons in the game of football. And I think she might be right, but they got to go to a lot of big games, got to be on the sideline with me, got to go to all the bowl games. And that's where Ryan kind of discovered the press box and all the sports writers and that sort of thing. And I think he decided way back then as a 10 or 11-year-old that I make a living doing this. I think that's what I want to do. And so he's still, now he's late 40s, he's still involved in sports. In fact, he covered the Indy 500 over the weekend. But it just, I think most officials at one point or another says, I need to write a book. So many funny things have happened, so many nice things have happened, so many exciting things have happened. And we finally just decided, by golly, it's time to do it. After I retired, we started making some notes and talking about it. And we found Triumph Books was interested, so they wanted to do the book. And quite frankly, it's the sales shocked us. Back in the fall, it was the number 2 selling sports and leisure book in America, and it did quite well. But I think if you care anything about football, if you understand father and son relationships and family relationships and that sort of thing, it's kind of a fun read, and it's a lot of fun things in there, a few heartbreaking things, but it's just kind of the way our life is revolving around the game for many years.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I can already tell it's going to be a tremendous read. You referenced some of the accolades the book's already received. I'm about 20 or 25 pages in, and it's one of those things, if life didn't happen with having to take kids to practices and everything that life brings, Coach, or excuse me, Dr. McGee, it's one of those that if I didn't have to put it down, then I could sit there and read it in one weekend, no doubt.
It's really funny when you do what I did for so long. Of course, I had a day job, but doing that for so long, it's you just meet so many memorable people, and when you get the retirement side, and I've been out of football officiating for a few years, and I was pretty busy on my job, and I get a phone call one day, and they said, "We're calling the North Carolina Sports Hall of Fame, and we want to talk about your career as an official." And I said, "Okay." So would you just mail us a list of your postseason assignments and maybe some of the other significant games you officiated? And I said, "Sure." I thought this last I'd hear that. And I think it's 2 years later, I got a phone call one day and said, "You've been elected to North Carolina Sports Hall of Fame." And I said, "Well, hang on just a minute. Let's make sure you don't have the wrong Jerry McGee." Because the Jerry McGee that played at Duke and later coached at East Carolina and was the athletic director at Elizabeth City, North Carolina for so many years. I said, "I want to make sure you got the right, this is the Jerry McGee that refereed." And they said, "Well, that's the one we're looking for." And I said, "Well, if this is a joke, it's a good one." But sure enough, I was the first college football official inducted in North Carolina Sports Hall of Fame, which is very, very meaningful to me, and certainly meaningful to my former coaches and my family. But there's only a handful of officials. We got Dee Kantner, who just worked her 24th Final Four in women's basketball. We got Joe West, who just became basically umpire. He worked more games than any umpire in the history of the major leagues. We got Jerry Austin, who worked 3 Super Bowls. People like John Clockerty, who worked 12 Final Fours in men's basketball. To be in the same breath with those people, to me, is just almost more than you can accept. But it's, as of today, as a matter of fact, I'm president of the board of the North Carolina Sports Hall of Fame, and I was looking this week at there's quite a few East Carolina people that are in the Hall of Fame, and certainly many more that should be. but hopefully we can help more Pirates get in their Hall of Fame in the future.
Yeah, no doubt. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I made a note and had forgotten to mention that as far as your induction to the North Carolina Sports Hall of Fame, being the only official, and then taking over as president of the board of directors, like you said, as of today, June the 1st. But Dr. McGee, really appreciate your time. There's so much more that we could dive into. Would love to have you back on down the road and do just that. But I know you're running tight on time. But really appreciate it. And as always, appreciate the time, but also go Pirates.
Yeah, I can't do enough or say enough for East Carolina. It changed my life in a wonderful way and changed my children's lives and grandchildren's lives. And I told them if I gave every dollar I had to East Carolina, it wouldn't be enough because I owe them everything. And I'll always be appreciative. And I'm real excited for Coach Godwin and our team this week.
That concludes this edition of the Bubba Rose Show. We appreciate you tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you listen. Also, be sure to follow us on social media at Bubba Rosenbaum on Twitter, at Bubba Rose Show on Instagram. Like and follow the Bubba Rose Show on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Let us hear from you by emailing us at thebubbaroseshow@gmail.com. Again, that's thebubbaroseshow@gmail.com. We'll see you next time, y'all.